Dark, rainy night. A quiet suburban neighborhood. The glow of streetlights flickers over the wet pavement. The sound of distant thunder rumbles as police lights flash red and blue against the darkness. A woman, Emily Parker, stands frozen at her front door, her face pale, her hands trembling. Officers swarm her home. 911 dispatcher, voiceover, calm yet firm. Ma'am, stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Can you tell me what you saw? Emily, shaky whisper. I think my husband is a killer. The call was cut off. The weight of those words hung in the air. Emily had never spoken them aloud before. She never thought she would. Inside the house, officers pushed open the basement door. The air was thick with a foul, metallic stench. It clawed at the back of their throats as they descended the creaking steps. Then, a shallow grave. A body. And on the skeletal fingers of the corpse, a wedding ring. Not Emily's, but another woman. Emily collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Her husband, Daniel Parker, the man she had loved for 10 years, was hiding a nightmare beneath their feet. And she never saw it coming. Emily met Daniel in 2011 at a coffee shop. She had spilled her drink, and he had been the kind stranger who helped her clean up. He was charming, making her laugh even when she was flustered. He was thoughtful, surprising her with little notes and gifts for no reason at all. He was protective, always making sure she got home safe. He seemed perfect. Too perfect. They married after 2 years of dating. Their life looked like something out of a magazine: date nights, vacations, a beautiful home in a peaceful neighborhood. But there were tiny red flags Emily ignored. Daniel had no real friends. He never spoke about his childhood. He avoided family gatherings, claiming he wasn't close with his relatives. Sometimes, late at night, Emily would wake up and find him sitting in the dark, staring at the wall. She convinced herself it was nothing. Until the night everything changed. It was a Thursday evening in late October. Emily was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she prepared dinner. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house. Then, the phone rang. Daniel answered. His entire demeanor shifted. Emily, watching him closely, who was that? Daniel, calmly smiling, just work. I have to step out for a bit. Emily frowned. It was already past 9 p.m. Emily, since when do you have late meetings? Daniel, grabbing his coat, don't wait up, okay? I won't be long. And just like that, he was gone. Hours passed. Emily checked the time. 11:42 p.m. A sinking feeling settled in her gut. Something was wrong. Then, a knock at the door. Emily's heart pounded as she approached the door. She opened it to find 2 police officers standing on her porch. Detective Marshall, flipping open his badge. Mrs. Parker, do you know where your husband is? Emily's stomach dropped. Emily, he left for work a few hours ago. What's going on? The detective exchanged a look with the officer beside him. Detective Marshall, slowly, carefully, we need to search your home. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Emily, what? Why? But the officers were already stepping inside. Moments later, a cop's voice echoed from the basement. Officer, we found something. Emily's knees nearly buckled. What was happening? What had Daniel done? She followed the officers downstairs, her breath shallow. The wooden floor had been pulled apart, exposing something beneath. A black trash bag. The stench of rotting flesh filled the air. An officer unzipped it. Emily gasped and stumbled back. Inside lay the remains of a woman. Her skin had withered away, but one thing was still clear. On her left hand, wrapped around her bony fingers, was a wedding ring. Not Emily's, but someone else's. Detective Marshall, Mrs. Parker, do you recognize this woman? Emily shook her head violently. Emily, whispering, no. I don't know her. I swear, I don't. But as officers searched the basement further, they uncovered more horrors. A locked trunk filled with ID cards of missing women. A hidden drawer with photographs of women tied up. A blood-stained knife, wrapped in one of Daniel's old shirts. Emily felt sick. How had she slept next to this man for years and never known? And then, the worst discovery of all. One of the photos was of a woman who had disappeared last year. A woman Daniel had once called just a coworker. Emily's mind raced. Daniel had left hours ago. Was he coming back? Or was he already planning his next kill? The detective's radio crackled. Radio, officer's voice, we have a location on Parker. Moving in now. Emily stared at the door, expecting it to swing open at any second. Her hands clenched into fists. Has she ever really known her husband? Or had she been living with a monster all along? A dark highway, just past midnight. The wail of sirens cuts through the stillness. Flashing red and blue lights streak across the wet pavement. Police cars race forward, engines roaring as officers grip their radios, their voices sharp with urgency. Dispatch, urgent voice suspect Daniel Parker is on the move. Last seen heading west on Route 17. Approach with caution, he is considered armed and dangerous. Daniel Parker was running. He had somehow known. By the time officers discovered the body in his basement, he was already speeding down the highway, his hands gripping the wheel with white-knuckled force. The air inside his car was suffocating. His breath came fast, uneven. The dashboard clock blinked 12:47 a.m. In his rearview mirror, headlights glowed closer. A police helicopter loomed above. A roadblock was ahead. For the first time in years, Daniel Parker was afraid. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't in control. Back at the house, Emily sat on the couch, her world unraveling around her. The home that once felt safe, the walls that once held her memories, now felt like a crime scene. Detective Marshall, calm but firm. Emily, I need to ask you again. Did you ever suspect anything? Any strange behavior? Emily swallowed hard. Emily, whispering, I told you. I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. But even as she said it, her mind rebelled. Had there been signs? Had she ignored them? Her wedding day flashed in her memory. The way Daniel had avoided the camera. The way he had been so secretive about his past. The way he had never, not once, talked about his childhood. Emily, murmuring to herself, who did I marry? Suddenly, a rustling noise came from the basement. An officer emerged from the shadows, holding a locked leather journal. Officer, we found this hidden in the walls. Detective Marshall took it, flipping it open. The pages were filled with names. Dates. Details of the victims. And then, Emily's own name. Written at the very end. She stared at it, frozen. Why was her name in there? Had she been his next target? Back on the road, Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears. His grip tightened on the wheel as he pushed the speedometer past 100 miles per hour. His mind was racing, searching for a way out. Radio crackle, officer's voice. Parker, pull over now. You can't outrun this. Daniel's eyes darted to the GPS. He needed an escape. A back road. Something. And then he saw it. An abandoned service road leading into the woods. Without hesitation, he jerked the wheel. The car veered sharply off the highway, crashing through bushes and trees before coming to a screeching halt. The police cars skidded to a stop behind him. Officers jumped out, guns drawn. Detective Marshall, shouting, hands up, Parker. It's over. Silence. The car door was open. But Daniel was gone. He had vanished into the trees. The journal was still in front of her. Her name stared back at her. Her own husband had kept a record of his victims. The dates. The locations. And next to each name, a single word. Taken. Except hers. Hers had one word written beside it. Pending. Her breath hitched. She wasn't just married to a killer. She had been living with her own executioner. And worst of all, he was still out there. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Daniel moved swiftly. His heart pounded, but his mind was cold, calculating. He had spent years preparing for a moment like this. He had exits. Plans. A way out. The sounds of sirens faded behind him. In his pocket, he clutched a small, blood-stained key. There was one place left he could go. A place where no one would find him. Not yet. Not until he was ready. Back at the station, Detective Marshall ran a hand over his face, exhausted. The case was spiraling. A serial killer on the run. A wife who had no idea she had been sleeping next to death itself. And then, Emily's phone buzzed. A new message. From a blocked number. Her fingers shook as she opened it. There was no text. Just a photo. A selfie of Daniel. Taken moments ago. Smiling. Holding up her wedding ring. Beneath it, a single word. Soon. A dimly lit motel room. The cheap wallpaper is peeling. A single flickering lamp casts long shadows. The air is heavy with silence. A digital clock on the bedside table blinks, 3:17 a.m. In the reflection of the grimy mirror, we see him, Daniel Parker. He leans over a cluttered desk, hands steady as he flips through a stack of old photographs. Each photo is of a different woman. All dead. All his. At the very top of the pile is a wedding photo, Emily in white, smiling. Daniel runs a finger over her face, then picks up a knife. A small, wicked smile creeps onto his lips. Because for Daniel, this wasn't over. Not yet. Not until Emily was his final masterpiece. Back at the police station, Emily gripped the table, her breathing ragged. The text still burned in her mind. Soon. Her fingers curled into fists. Emily, whispering to Detective Marshall he's not done. The detective nodded grimly. Detective Marshall, we know. And we think we know where he's going next. He slid a map across the table. It was marked with red XS. Each X represented one of Daniel's previous victims. Emily's stomach turned. There was one last X that wasn't crossed out. A location just outside of town. A small, abandoned cabin. Emily, realizing that's where he's waiting. The forest was eerily quiet as officers approached the isolated cabin. The trees loomed overhead, blocking out the moonlight. Their boots crunched on damp leaves as they moved in tight formation, guns drawn. The cabin door was ajar. A single light glowed from inside. Detective Marshall signaled to his team, then pushed the door open. Inside, a table was set for two. Candles burned low. At the center of the table, Emily's wedding dress, perfectly laid out. And then, a slow clap from the shadows. Daniel Parker stepped forward, smiling. Daniel, calmly, you made it. His eyes gleamed with something unhinged. He was waiting for them. The air in the cabin was suffocating. Daniel stood across from them, completely still, completely composed. Detective Marshall, steady, it's over, Daniel. Daniel, grinning over. He reached into his pocket. The officers tensed, guns raised. But he wasn't going for a weapon. He was going for a photo. He tossed it onto the table. It was Emily. Taken tonight. Detective Marshall's blood ran cold. Detective Marshall, sharp, where is she? Daniel just smiled. And then, from behind them, a muffled scream. Somewhere in the cabin, Emily struggled against the ropes digging into her wrists. Her heart pounded as she realized where she was, a hidden room behind the walls. She had been here the whole time. Watching. Listening. She heard the officers yelling outside. She heard Daniel laughing. And she knew. If she didn't act now, she wouldn't get another chance. With one desperate pull, she yanked against the ropes, loosening them just enough. She grabbed a broken shard of glass from the floor and cut herself free. Back in the main room, Daniel took a slow step forward, eyes gleaming. Daniel, softly, do you know what the best part is? Detective Marshall kept his gun trained. Daniel, whispering, she was going to be my last one. A sudden bang. Daniel staggered. Not from a gunshot, but from a knife sinking into his side. Behind him, Emily stood, panting, eyes burning. She had stabbed him. Emily, through clenched teeth, you don't get to decide how this ends. Daniel stumbled forward, clutching his wound. His smirk faltered. For the first time, he looked afraid. And in that moment, the officers moved in, slamming him to the ground. Handcuffs clicked shut. And just like that, it was over. Weeks later, Emily sat across from Detective Marshall at the station. Emily, softly, how many? Marshall hesitated, then slid a folder across the table. Inside, the full list of Daniel's victims. Over 30 names. Emily's throat tightened. She had loved a man who had killed dozens. And she had been his final obsession. But she survived. And now, she had one last thing to do. She picked up a pen and crossed out the last name. Hers. Because Daniel Parker would never hurt anyone ever again.